Hello, today is May 2nd, 2023. I'm meeting today with Mr. James G. Smith at his home in Johnstown, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Jim, and thanks for sitting down today to tell your story.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Very good. Let's start out, if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family, if you would.
I was born in Hollister, California. That my father was in the Navy at that time. That was in November 26, 1944. And they were stationed out there. He was a naval air flyer who got grounded and ended up working as a ground officer in building and rebuilding the airfields. He was on Guadalcanal and helped rebuild 2 airfields there for the U.S. to use. We lived in Kansas City, Kansas, is where he grew up, where my mom grew up, and they ended up moving back there after the military. I went to high school in Kansas City. I went to Washington High School. And then when I graduated from Washington High School, I went on to Kansas State University. I also spent a year at Kansas City, Kansas Junior College, and then went back and finished my degree from Kansas State University in Manhattan. After that point in time, I did not know what I was going to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I thought about the military and a number of other things. And I had a friend who introduced me to University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, and my brother had attended there as well. And so I came out and started a master's program in the summer of 68 when 67 when I finished with my bachelor's degree. I realized that that's not what I wanted to do at that time. I wanted to teach and coach. That's what I wanted to be. And so I went back, finished my student teaching, and then moved into teaching and coaching in Kansas City in the Overland Park School District. That's where I received my orders to report and was being inducted there into the military.
So prior to that, because you were in school, you had a deferment?
I was deferred until the spring, or through the fall of 67. And then I was able to get a job also in the Overland Park schools for teaching for a substitute, basically a long-term sub, I think they call it now, for the whole semester of the fall of spring of 68. And that kept me out as well. But then in May of 68, I received the letter that you will report, and was drafted at that point in time. Yeah. So from there, it's pretty much my military story.
Well, now, what much of a gap did you have between getting your notice and then reporting off to basic training?
I originally got my notice in November of 67, and so the Kansas City office that was telling me I needed a draft, we had several conversations to even keep me out for that spring and to finish my teaching assignment for that year. And actually, I got the notice in late May of 68, and I reported in June. So I had very little time between the time I reported and the time that I got the final notice. So.
And you went into the Army then? Or?
I was drafted, so I went into the Army. A wrinkle in all that was my brother, who was a couple years younger than I. He also got a notice for the draft, and I really insisted that he look into alternatives because he had a family, and that I did not want him to go to Vietnam and me not go to Vietnam, because we both felt one of us or both of us were going to go to Vietnam. So I just said that's the way it's going to be, because I was still single and had no plans as to what my future was going to be other than teaching. And so that worked out. And then when I reported, it was, to me it was stressful because I had no idea as to what the experience would be like or anything. So
that transition from civilian life into military life was...
Yeah, I think it was difficult.
Yeah.
I remember very distinctly when I reported, the day that I reported in Kansas City, Missouri, and loaded the bus for Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And that was my basic training site. And from there, it just materialized as it went along. I was ordered to go to Fort Lewis, Washington for AIT, and it was basically infantry training. And at Fort Lewis, Washington, an interesting thing happened. We were in one of our day sessions or classroom sessions, and they gave us a half sheet of paper, and it asked there if you wanted to go to NCO school, non-commissioned officer school at Fort Benning, Georgia. I had one or two choices, yes or no. And I said no, I was not interested because I had heard too many stories already about what happened to the NCOs that go over there as instance, and they were not trained long enough or well enough and with no experience. And so I just thought, well, I'll see what happens. Well, I got to...
Sorry to interrupt, but with your college education, could you have gone off to officer training school, or was that an option?
They didn't give me that option,
Really?
but I probably could have looked into that. So basically what I was planning to do was fulfill my obligation, understanding I'd probably go to Vietnam, represent myself as well as I could, and finish that as quickly as I could, because my plan was to come back and finish my master's and then work on getting a good teaching, coaching job. So then I was in the military, and so I do remember distinctly going to Benning, Fort Benning, and then and again they made sure we wanted to go to NCO school, but the only alternative at that point was then they said, well, if you don't take that option, then we'll send you across the fort to the dog trainer school. And then again, I had heard too many stories about who did the tunnel clearances and stuff like that in Vietnam, so it was not a very lucrative option. So I said, well, I'll just go ahead. I can do this. I'll go through the NCO school, do the best I can, take advantage of the opportunities that the Army offered. And so that's how I got into NCO school and became an E5. So once that training was finished, then you had to go to OJT, which was on-the-job training, as they called it, with a unit, and it could be a lot of places in the country. I happened to be sent to Fort Ord, California, a very beautiful place to train and to be. An area I had only familiar with was the fact that I was born out there. It was right near Hollister, California, and so I went into OJT as a buck sergeant and trained a unit of AITers, just like I had been, who were going to be sent on to Vietnam in time as well, probably. So I spent the training session there in the spring of '68, and then my orders didn't come through, and so I was assigned then to be on hold, basically, and just to work in the company there as a auxiliary officer, non-commissioned officer. And then, so my orders came through, and I was to ship out the 1st of July of '69. So did I say 68 and 69? I've got it all confused. Anyway, it's 69. I was in 68 to 70, and went to Vietnam in 69, 70.
Well, you'd mentioned earlier a number of times hearing stories about this and about that, and had a general idea of what it was like over there, but you had the unique perspective of seeing what was going on here in this country. Did all that play into your mind? What were you thinking as you're heading to Vietnam with everything that you've heard and seen and experienced up to that point? I mean,
Well, I think that the atmosphere here was not good at all. And being in first a collegiate environment and the way people were responding, and then a personal environment, which I wasn't in very long or very much, but you could see that it wasn't something that you really wanted to do, probably.
Yeah, sure.
It wasn't, two things to me, I really didn't understand, and the military didn't offer me an understanding of what our goals were over there. And I'd heard that it's just the type of warfare we were in, the jungle warfare that we were in, that was just not, from people who had come back, it was just not a really good environment to be in. And so you were real hesitant to go. And so anyway, I went and
flew over, or a ship, troop ship? How'd you guys?
well, I was just I found a letter in my materials that my dad wrote me the first few weeks I was over there. And basically it was a letter saying, these are probably things I should have told you before you left about war. And it's very heartening. I still have it. I like it. I've read it a few times. But it was good to get. But the experience, he mentions in here, put me on the plane from Kansas City to Oakland. And that's where I flew out of. It was, I think, all in all, about a 9-hour flight. I don't remember exactly. We went through Japan and then down to Tanzania is where we landed. But the anxiety you carry with you all the time is amazing, thinking back on it, you know. And when we landed, we got off, and as most people say, it's like stepping into an oven, and you really feel the heat and the difference in the tropical area. And by initial 2 or 3 days and weeks, I can't even remember the weeks or the time frame really before I got to my unit in Platoon. It was Anari, Camp Anari, and the 4th Infantry Division headquarters were in Platoon. And but it was several days of, you know, just not training. There was no training going on. We were just routed from here to there to get our equipment, to get organized and get on the buses. And we did take buses, which I think back and I was really surprised, because I remember taking pictures of villages and stuff like that as we were on trucks, we were on buses, as I recall. Now, anyhow, so we were transported up there, and we finally got to our unit.
Did you go over as a unit, or did you go over as a replacement?
No, I went over as a replacement, and there were several of us in that group that went over. And the funny thing is, I never saw any of those guys again that landed there with me and everything. And I never did run into any of my NCO cadre people either, and that's really surprised me. I did see a few friends on different occasions later on in my tour when I ended up down in Saigon and a couple other places. But so we landed, got acquainted with our unit or where we were, established, got our equipment, and then they took us out to our first duty station, and this was in trucks. The replacements for the Charlie Company, the 1st of the 8th, 4th Infantry Division. So we were trucked out to Fire Base Denise, which was not far from Camp Anari in that area. So, and it was pretty well secured as much as could be. It was an artillery base with the howitzers on the artillery base, and so we were initially security for that artillery base, and we ran missions out of there, mostly nighttime missions. When I first got there and met my experienced grunts and soldiers. It was quite an interesting thing to me. There were soldiers who were like short timers, weeks from going to Cameron and heading home. There were people that had been there 6 months. Soldiers that had been there 6 months, and there were several others similar to me that were just replacements in our unit. I was first a squad leader, which is what the E5s were trained to be, and becoming familiar with the unit itself was new. We trained as if we had 4 squads in a platoon, when you get there, there's only 3 squads. We did not have a mortar squad. The mortar people were in a separate platoon. It was more a mortar platoon. We were in the Central Highlands. It was most of our missions came right out of wherever we were stationed at that time, and they were mostly fire-based kind of places. We didn't actually work out of the Platoon or the Camp Anari places or unit as such. But anyway, so I had a lot, and I had decided, I think, a long time before that, when I got there, I think as a person, I was in a command position in a way, but I didn't know what I was doing. I think I mentioned I was inexperienced and everything, but enough of training. I learned enough in training to know that you've got some experienced veterans in your platoon, in your squad. Listen to them. And I think that was probably the best advice I had ever received, was just to listen to what they say, make your decisions as a leader based on what they say, and you'll do fine. And I didn't feel comfortable in any way being in combat, but I think that made me understand a little bit more my role as a squad leader.
And I would imagine it helped the guys accept you better as well.
Well, I knew in my own mind that I needed to be accepted by them if I was going to be a leader. I mean, I had gone through the leadership training, the best the Army can provide at that time and rush you through, but and I had a background in coaching and stuff like that, and so I felt like I had some leadership skills, and so anyway, I started just as a squad leader, and we basically, as I said, had night missions where we would go out to listening posts and ambushes and stuff like that. That's what we did initially. Then the next assignment we had was probably the best that you could get as an infantry person. We had what was called bridge duty, and basically we were assigned to bridges along. Our whole company was assigned to bridges along the highway that communicated, and caravans came from Ankh, east of Platoon to Platoon, and they were daily caravans. But we were assigned to the bridges, and then we did duty on the bridges as security, mainly at night. There were tank units along the highway all during the day, and they positioned themselves 50 to 100 yards off the highway, and it was cleared about 100 yards on each side of the highway, and they would position themselves in that position in case they're needed on the highway, but during the day. But we primarily did night duty. When they pulled into the bridges, that's where there would come in, 2 tanks would come into the bridge from each direction, one from each direction, and that's where they would have their night stay and where they would sleep. and then we would do, basically a rotation of people, and we would be in the towers. There were sandbag towers, and take care of the position. It wasn't I didn't think it was all that great a duty myself. At that point, I was still a squad leader, because my squad was on that bridge, and the locals were very adamant about coming onto your bridge and selling coke and selling this and selling that. And also the ladies of the night would come on and want to stay on the bridge with the soldiers. That was I couldn't control that really. You feel like you can, but you really can't. And so I just was worried that we wouldn't get, concerned that we wouldn't get a VC a Viet Cong on the bridge, setting up to try to deter our soldiers and then attack the bridge. Fortunately, my worries, I guess, held true, and I didn't have any of that happen to me, but I have seen bridges, towers that were satchel charged and blown up, and how what could happen to you. So
Now, would you guys camp there as well, or just do night duty and then go back to a camp during the day, or were you there 24/7?
we were there 24.
Okay.
We when we left, I think maybe I ought to go back to the fire base. At the fire base, we had hot chow. We would go get our chow and bring it back to our defensive position to eat. But we were there, 24/7. And so we didn't have bad food at that point. But we went on the bridges and we had sea rations. And sometimes that was only a week or 2 weeks at the most that we would have that duty. And then we would be back out in the field. So those were my first two experiences. And then we went to another fire base, but we weren't on that fire base to do defensive. We did help with the defensive defense, but by standing guard and stuff like that. But most of the time we were organized, and we moved out of those defensive positions into the field around between Pleiku and the Cambodian border and stuff like that. It was not all jungle. It was mountainy in a sense, but not like mountains we have here in Colorado. But it was mountainy country, and that's what we patrolled in. And we were in mostly search and destroy missions, where we were seeking out the mountain yard villages or the VC villages where they were hiding out, and trying to make contact with those soldiers. So anyway, then and that's what we did after we left the bridge duty. We ended up being on bridge duty 3 times while I was there, and that was, like I said, a pretty good way for them to let us stand down and still be effective. There are two different patrols or missions that we went on patrols that I would like to try to tell the story about. Again, I was on one of these. I was still a squad leader, and we were. Well, we were out in the field, as I said, and we were looking to find Mountain Yard Village, and we came upon a Mountain Yard Village that was pretty much under the canopy, so to speak, and we didn't even have on our map, and you were worried that you would enter a village that had VC in it. And so, come to find out, they knew where we were, and they were gone, long gone, before we ever got to the village. All we found in that village was maybe caches of rice and things like that the soldiers or the North Vietnam soldiers had them stash and store for them during the walk from North Vietnam down into South Vietnam. And that was a pretty simple mission. We had very little contact at all with any other soldiers. But then we had a situation where in rotation, our platoon sergeant rotated out, and I was the senior E5 buck sergeant in the platoon, and I became this platoon sergeant just by default, basically. Then we went into a time where we were in a rainy season, and we were out in the field for 14 days without ever returning to a base camp or anything. And it was pretty much miserable. It really was. The 8th Infantry was a combat assault battalion. So we were always flown in by helicopter and into landing zones, and then we were always picked up by helicopter. This one time, I was a platoon sergeant, but we were flown in, and we landed on it was a company size mission, and so there were 3 platoons in our headquarters company, unit, captain and the company captain and everything. A lot of times we were just a platoon size mission, but this was a company size. And we landed in a pretty arid area with just long grass. And it was at this time that leaving the helicopter, I moved out to a perimeter position like we are all organized to do, know what we're doing, it's all organized. And I hit a punji stake in my left leg, just above the boot top, and in the fleshy area. And I didn't have the wherewithal at that point to grab the stake and take it with me, because again, we were trying to defend the LZ and bring in the rest of the company. So, you just do what you can do. You continue on. It was sore, it hurt. I got a hold of the medic as soon as I had an opportunity when we were in a perimeter setting later on, and he medicated it and wrapped it and did the best. But that was the time when we were in the boonies for 14 days, in the rain and humping the hills and the mud and everything. And at one point he kept checking it and trying to bandage it and all. And he did not think it had any fecal material or anything on it, because it didn't infect right away. Or he'd have just gone ahead and shipped me out and got me medication or medical assistance. But anyway, after a while, he saw that due to the environment that it was getting infected, and so he made arrangements for me to be lifted over to a medical hospital, field hospital, and I was over there about 5 days, I think, and they lanced it and took care of it and got it healed, starting to heal. And so again, I wasn't there very long, and I went back to my unit. But I understood when I got back to my unit then that they had been under fire about 4 days out of the 5 or 6 that I was on.
Oh, wow.
And again, we had a second lieutenant, which was our platoon leader. He was a first lieutenant, and I can't say that he was very well liked, but not like the third lieutenant we had in our platoon during the time I was there. Anyway, he got wounded, and I just couldn't figure out why he would have been wounded. But I hadn't been around any of my platoon buddies much, so I didn't get to talk to many of them until almost the end of my tour. But I understand, I found out later at a reunion that he actually got himself shot, basically, by a maneuver that he shouldn't have pulled. He was leading the platoon, as he should, and he was up front, and they were wanting a ceasefire, and he lifted up his arm and got his arm shot by friendly fire. So he ended up out of there, which none of my friends or buddies were upset about that. But anyway, but then here we are without a platoon leader. And during that time then, we were in a, let me see, it was a company-sized mission, and we were out with all the other platoons. And we had a nighttime perimeter, and then the next day we were to be resupplied. And no, that's not the same one. Anyway, this was in another time when I had a second lieutenant as a platoon leader, and we were on a mission with a company-sized mission, and we rotated the platoon that went down into the LZ that was identified as an LZ and set up a defensive position, so a perimeter, so that the choppers could land and drop off the resupply, and then we'd pack it back to the company. Anyway, we had a second lieutenant who was pretty green, and we went down, got the resupply in, got it organized as to how we were going to pack it back and who was carrying and what all. And we got a sniper fire from the tree line about 100, maybe 100 yards away. And it kept moving from one spot to another. But there was only one that we could tell, one person sniping on us. Well, they decided between command, our company commander, and that he would call in artillery on that tree line. So I'm right next to him. We're back to back, sitting right next to the tree to stay protected as best we can. And he gives them our location. Then he gives what is supposed to be the tree line location, and he gives them our location again. So virtually he was calling in fire on our position. And I lost it at that point, and I took the phone from the RTO, and I just called in a correction, and it worked out that they got the correction in time and fired into the tree line instead of firing on top of it. So that was one of the most frightening experiences I had. Then I guess the only other time was when the lieutenant left our group after 14 days. We were CA'd out to on a mission, company-sized mission, and we realized that there was not but one line officer with our company. It was the CO. There wasn't an exec officer, there wasn't a platoon leader in any of the three platoons. The platoons were all being led by people like me, buck sergeants. And I was just doing the best I could, leading the men as I had seen other leaders do. And we got off we were CA'd in, and we got into a defensive position, perimeter, and we started getting sniped at. And the CO started sending out orders over the phone. I had a RTO with me, Ernest Garcia, Ernie. Anyway, he took the messages and tried to transfer them to me while we were kind of under fire. And we were in a secure area, so we weren't really getting any wounded or taking any wounded at that point. But then the sniper ceased and disappeared. Nobody could find him, and we got called to the CO's position, the three buck sergeants that were leading the platoons, and I've never had a butt chewing, I'll say nicely, of that kind in my whole life up to that point. And we deserved it probably, but we also were not trained to be lieutenants. And
What were you chewed out for?
Well, he was sending maneuver orders to our platoon. And I think we were on the right flank, and we were to flank right and try to sweep through the jungle and find this sniper who would have been long gone anyway, probably. But we weren't reacting to the order.
Because you weren't getting the messages, right?
Well, I was getting a message, but I couldn't communicate with the rest of my platoon because we were under fire, and they're behind whatever they can find cover. Right. And I'm not sure I'm going to send them out there. When I'm in a territory which I don't know, other than to have a map. And so I just knew my own personal situation, but he was chewing all three of us out for not responding to orders. But probably well deserved if we were going to try to find that sniper. Come to find out, we were out there 6 days, and 4 of the 6 days, they were sniping at us from the edge of our maneuvers. They knew right where we were. They knew we didn't have any line officers. They knew, we're all guessing there, but that's what they were doing, and they kept us busy the whole time we were out there. The final straw in that one maneuver was that we rotated the point where we walked, by platoon, we walked point for the company. And I think it was about the 4th day that I knew we were coming up to walk point. And he let me know that, 1st platoon would walk point today. And we got to go up this ravine to get to the top of the hill in order to get resupply. And the ravine was basically jungle. And so that was very fearful for me, not personally, but for my men. I can recall that feeling. And we talked earlier about leadership style a little bit. Well, I knew who I could trust. I knew of my men who were brave enough to do what they could do, but I very seldom would appoint somebody into a position as a point who had to take a machete and cut her way through the jungle to help make a trail for the company. But I knew, like, I would pick 2 or 3 people that I could trust, and I'd say their names and say, who of the 3 of you would want to walk point, rather than me saying, Don DeCitas, you're going to walk point. Well, to me, that was a command that is putting his life in jeopardy, and I didn't see that I had to do that. I would have if I'd had to, but I think my style had led to a little bit different way of working with my men. But Don DeCitas of Joliet, Illinois, stepped up and said, I got it, give me the machete, and off we went. And fortunately, again, it was a good decision because we made it to the top of that ridge, and no one was wounded or injured in that whole maneuver. So to finish that off, the story, I just got to do this because I just can't believe what we did. We were again under jungle canopy at the top of the ridge, and the only way we could get resupply was to have the choppers drop the resupply through the canopy. So we ended up clearing a 10, 12-foot circle wide enough to allow the resupply choppers to hover and drop the resupply. Now, they were probably in danger doing that as well, so it's not a real good area. So that was that mission and the other mission. So I think those were probably 2 of the missions that I would relate that probably I've never talked to anybody about. Maybe a couple of them I have with the vet center group that I meet with weekly, where we don't talk about the blood and guts in the group. We don't talk about religion or politics unless the blood and guts pertains to our psychological welfare at that point and what we're talking about. But so that's not something I don't think I've ever even talked about that to my children and my wife too much, but
Well, I just can't imagine. There's a lot of things as I look to the stories. I mean, here's this Midwest boy out on, pretty much the prairie of the United States in these thick jungles, adjusting to that, and just all the elements that you're not probably eating properly. Hygiene's awful. You're not getting enough sleep, and then you've got all that out in the elements, and then you've got the umbrella of being in war, and then I think on top of more so for you, then you've got the additional pressures of looking out for your men. How did you function during those time periods? I mean,
one of the questions you put in the outline kind of was, how did you feel when you got to Vietnam? Well, I think I took on a fear factor that I just wore for the full time I was over there. A fear for myself, obviously, but that wasn't, to me, I don't ever remember that being primary. I think primary to me was making sure that my men were as in safe a position as they could be, whether they are on ambush, listening post. As a matter of fact, one of the first orders I had was to take my squad, as a squad leader, and go out and dig a listening post. And so it's just one of the things that you had to do to try to keep your people safe,
just that pressure of making the wrong decision and injuring or killing somebody. I can't imagine carrying that for...
Right. Well, obviously, the night before we had to make a walk point in that mission, I didn't sleep a wink. First, I was worried about making sure we were awake on the perimeter and standing guard, doing our guard. But I can recall distinctly that night and the fear factor of taking those men into that ravine and trying to to come out alive. And but that's Army, that's infantry, that's life. You say, well, you learn to deal with it, but you don't really learn to deal with it. So.
And you said with your leadership approach, you let the men decide on walking point and such. Were the men pretty good about saying, well, it's my turn this day, or?
I really can say I had good men in that respect, and the experienced one that knew how to do it and knew how to spot booby traps and do all that. They stepped up most of the time. There were times I would have to assign, but I want you to do this because you've got the experience. We need you up there to lead the platoon, whatever, it may be, or the squad. But I mainly did that as a platoon sergeant. And then fortunately, later on in the fall of '69, we got a reserve lieutenant out of Spokane, Washington, Lieutenant Davis, who was assigned to our platoon. A wonderful guy. He was just a good, down-to-earth person, and he too knew how to handle men as a leader. Fortunately, coming from his background and experience. He had not been in any other combat situation, but I really respect him a lot, and I've tried several times to find him since I got back. And there were two people that I didn't know when I left what happened, what would happen to them. He was going, I better stop there and say our battalion was being brought home. So the colors were being brought home. So all of the people in my platoon were being distributed to other battalions. And we knew that the battalion's 4th Infantry was going into Cambodia. We just didn't know when. I was right on the edge of that, and fortunately I didn't have to do that, but I rotated out before they went. But I knew they were going to be spread out, and I lost track of them. One of them was my RTO, Ernie Garcia, which I mentioned earlier. And then I got back, and finally, it was not, but about 10 years ago that I found that he was still alive in Southern California. And then after a while, I found out about this one group, the company, Charlie Company was having reunions, and I had it maybe, well, I started looking maybe in 07, 08, when I was retiring, and I just didn't know whatever happened to him for the 40 years before that. And so I found several men in that group that had been going to reunions, and I finally got to go to a reunion.
Oh, wow.
In 08 and 2018, and there were 5 guys from my platoon at that reunion. So that was a real thrill in a lot of ways. I had pretty good duty. We always, well, the year that I was there was a stand down for Thanksgiving and a stand down for Christmas, which mainly we went to some type of a rear area. And we were able to, in a way, celebrate, have hot food and like that. And anyway, then we would be out in the field again between those times. And
Did you ever, during that year, get an R&R to go to?
I was eligible, yes, and it happened to come right after Christmas of '69. And I got an R&R to Hong Kong. I wanted to go to Australia. It was I think it was my first, and Hong Kong was my second. It was a delightful experience. I've always wanted to take my wife back there, but we haven't ever been able to do that. And it was a good relief from the duties and everything. But I went back, and I was back in the field again for, I think, only about 2 weeks, and then I got a rear assignment, and they gave me we were on a fire base called Rome Plow. It was, the engineers were building a fire base mainly. They were clearing and building a fire base, and we were there for security. We stood guard, mainly at night and everything. And then I got contacted there by, I think, our battalion first, wanting to know if I would re-up and extend my tour for another year. And then they came back later on and said, how about if we can promote you to a second lieutenant? My feelings about second lieutenants wasn't real good. But if I would re-up and extend for another year. They were really, obviously, in dire need of small unit leaders, and because of the way we were fighting the war. But I think tied to that, I got an in-country R&R to Vung Tau in the south part of Vietnam, beautiful seaside resort area, and enjoyed that. I did go with a friend on that R&R, so he and I just had a good time. And then probably that was the only other contact that I remember having from that. I didn't even get any when I was processing out, which I thought I might, to re-up. And I have to mention Ken Anderson. He is the company clerk for my company, Charlie Company. He was an excellent young man. He is also, he was a educated person. That was our company clerk. He knew rules and regs, and he did all he could to get the men in that company whatever he could get them. Promotion, medals, all that. Oh, wow. He was really good about that. Wow. And the one thing he did get me, he found out that I had started a master's degree at University of Northern Colorado. He said, at one time I was in the rear, he said, would you want an early out to go back and work on that? And I said, out of here? He said, yes, I think I can get you a 2 or 3 month early drop. So he went to work on that. And I think that's part of the reason I was moved to the rear in the early part of 70 in company, company command issues, and doing, it was basically doing platoon sergeant work in the rear. And trying to keep our men under control when they were short timers, waiting days or weeks to get out and go home, which was probably a more difficult job sometimes than being in the field, but not more dangerous, let's put it that way.
Right.
So he did, he went about doing that, and so I actually came home 1st of March instead of the 1st of July.
Wow, I'll be doing.
So I was fortunate.
Yeah.
In the rear, the duty was basically security. We would rotate our platoon and other platoons in Charlie Company, a section of the base camp perimeter that we would go down and serve as night guard duty.
Well, when you talk about being in the rear, I mean, it wasn't like World War II where the front lines are 10 clicks up that way. There really was no front line. So how'd they put you in the rear?
Probably the only thing I would say, it was a more secure area.
Oh, okay.
It had big guns. It had more men. It had more, I guess, artillery and mortars and everything. But you would go to like I say, the base camp perimeter, and you'd have 5 or 6 rolls of concertina wire out there, and you'd sit there all night looking into the dark, hoping you didn't have anybody get in your wire. And because they would, and they had, and they did. As a matter of fact, I just reread a letter from this one buck sergeant that I was really good friends with, Terry Cogswell from Kentucky, and he was an NCO, went over same kind of classification I was in. He got a rear echelon job. As a matter of fact, he got that job while I was out being medicated from my punji stick. I was eligible for it from our platoon, but I wasn't there, so he was next in line. I find that out later on, but anyway, that was what we did. Basically, was we would do guard duty, and I had a real fear there again for my men and for the base camp that they stayed away, because they could get access to alcohol, they'd get access to marijuana, they could get access to, not the women like we did out in the bridges, but they did have access to things. And so I spent, when my platoon was on guard duty, I spent the whole night going from bunker to bunker to bunker to bunker to bunker to bunker, just to make sure they're staying awake and staying awake. Because I had that fear. We were protecting other people. It wasn't just us, we were protecting other people. So there was a lot, I was trained, I think, by the military to be aware of and to be part of, but then I had one experience where I did run into a friend of mine. He was actually a roommate at Kansas State.
Yeah.
I had to go, they sent me down to, it was outside of Saigon, it must have been Tonsanut. I don't know for sure whether it was there or Cameron Bay, it might have been Cameron Bay. But they sent me down to pick up an AWOL young man that had left our unit and gone on his own and ended up down there. And all I had to do was fly down and put on a 45 on my hip and fly down and go contact him, and he'd already agreed to come back, and it was not a strenuous situation. I didn't have any problems at all, but while I was there, I ran into a warrant officer who was flying choppers out of there, and who I'd gone to school with. And he came, as a matter of fact, you asked about seeing some of those kind of people. When I got back home, he was stationed at 4th Infantry, so down in Colorado Springs, so he contacted, and he flew up and took me for a chopper ride on one of his he had to fly so many hours, and he flew up. I was living in Greeley then, and he took me on a chopper ride. But that's about the only person that I found. I did, like I said, found 5 guys going to a reunion. There's a young man, Terry, who lived in central Kansas, Ellis, I think. Anyway, I've tried to find him. I couldn't find him or anything about him, even in his hometown. Driving through there once, coming out of Nebraska where I live. So I guess I'm pretty much to the end of my tour. And the feelings, I've expressed this to other people. When they finally process you out and give you a clean pair of fatigues, it wasn't a new pair of fatigues, but they give you a clean pair of fatigues to fly home in, and they put you on this big jet, just like you came in on, and it's almost a physical feeling that I had of relief when we flew out of Saigon airspace, or I think we were in Cam Bay, but we flew out of the airspace of Vietnam. You know, and you can't really explain it either, but it's just almost a relief off your shoulders.
Yeah, sure.
And then the processing at Fort Lewis, we flew into Fort Lewis, Washington. We processed out of there. It's chaotic as far as I was concerned. We were carrying our own files from, you know, we had to go to this place, we have to process out of medical, we had to process out of everything. Every office that we had to process out of, we were carrying our own files. So I was sitting there waiting to go into one of the offices or something, and I was looking through that file, and right there in that file was my little half sheet of paper from Fort Lewis that said, I don't want to go to NCO school.
Oh, really?
Just had to laugh. You know, had to say, well, that didn't do me any good, did it? So anyway, and I only have one, and I'll talk a little bit about, if you want me to, what I, then the rest of my life, so to speak, held. But the last thing was, what you mentioned earlier, what was going on here, what people were doing and saying. The only one that really affected me, because, well, I was flying standby, so I left my uniform, put on my greens, my dress uniform, and wore them to the airport, got on the airplane, and unfortunately I was sitting in the middle seat of a 3-seater, and I think it was a lady at the window, and there's a gentleman on the aisle, and he started to just have a conversation. He said, "Are you coming back from Vietnam?" And I said, "Yes, I am. I was in the 4th Infantry Division around Platoon." And that was all that was said. And then he got up and went to the, they're not stewardesses, they're whatever they are now.
Flight attendant.
Flight attendants now. Yeah, he went to the flight attendant station, and then he didn't come back. And so later on, when the flight attendant was coming around and giving a, serving us, I said, "Can you tell me," it was the one that he talked to, I saw. I said, "Can you tell me what that gentleman said when he came up to the station?" And she said, "He said he didn't want to sit next to any baby killers." And so that was the start of my stuffing my whole experience. And then you ask, well, how did your parents address it when you got home?
Did they see a different person that left and that came back? I mean, did they?
They just reseated him somewhere else, and somebody, I don't know whether they put somebody else in. No, I don't remember anybody sitting there.
No, I mean, no, with your parents, did they see a difference in the gym that left and the gym that came back?
Good question. I would say they probably did. Another part of it that I didn't talk about, when I was able to go on R&R, and before that, in the time of Thanksgiving and Christmas, I had a significant other back home, and she was finishing a master's degree, and we had talked about wedding, and so she felt that we should get married. I wasn't in the field anymore. Once I got out of the field, excuse me, was in the rear echelon, I started thinking about that. So she planned our whole wedding for the first part of April. So I knew I was coming home first part of March. So I did one thing that my mom wasn't real pleased with, was I flew to Colorado first because we were going to be in Greeley. And I had a good friend from here that picked me up, was on the faculty at UNC. And I came up here to find housing for us. And then I flew home. And so my mom wasn't excited that I flew here before I flew home. Flying home was probably the most important thing. So I could understand that. So she really had a tough time for that time I was in country.
Oh, no doubt.
And but then they were very good. I stayed there until we got married. And from there we moved to Greeley. My first wife was Diane Breitweiser, and we moved to Greeley. And I worked on my master's degree, finished it in a year. But in the meantime, I was hired as a graduate assistant at the University of Northern Colorado Department of Education Laboratory School of Education, I must say. And that was a K-12 program. And while I was working the final 3 quarters on my master's, I was able to teach in the elementary school, and secondary school at the same time. And I was able to coach high school athletics. So I was an assistant coach in football, basketball, and baseball at that time, and got lots of good experience. And then when I finished my master's, I was hired, the basketball coach left, changed jobs, went to Northern Iowa as a baseball coach. He was a basketball and baseball coach, so I was hired as the head basketball coach at University High School. So a lot of things, at that point, I would say you asked how your faith comes into play when you're in country.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I think about it a lot. We had several opportunities to have chaplain do services for us on some of the base camps and on the fire bases and stuff like that. And I think those of us that still had a strong faith base, background, and I did, thanks to my parents, I think we took advantage of those, and I think we always believed that the Lord would be with us. If we were supposed to expire, we would. If not, we would come home. And so, that's where I think we were and where I was, and I continued. I think I have since I got back. My first wife and I belonged to a church, and my second wife, who maybe I ought to explain about the first wife. Maybe that's a good change of direction. We had a very good life for about 5 years. I was coaching and teaching and doing what I wanted to do, and then we started our family. Shelby, our son, came along. And it was at about 9 years or so, 8 or 9 years, she got very fearful of me. She felt like I was an angry person. And I had no idea. I did have a temper. I had a temper when I was younger, even with my mom. She and I both had similar kind of temper personality, but I never thought of it being any different than that. And yet she was afraid that I would be a danger to her and to our son. So we separated and got a dissolution of marriage. And about that same time, I changed positions. I'd been at the laboratory school for 9 years, and it was a type of place where you worked hard. You loved the kids and the students and the faculty. You were all close. It was a small school, a class 2A school here in Colorado. And but you just worked yourself. You coached 3 sports as long as you could handle it, and did all that. So, but it was what I wanted. And it was I think, my drive that got me through Vietnam. I had a plan. I knew what I wanted to do for me. Wow. And so that had a great deal to do with it anyway, and part of my faith. So I came back and I did that, and then I went to I went from Northern Colorado to University of Northern Colorado to the State Department of Education in North Dakota. I was looking for a change, and I had a friend that was getting the job notices from the North Dakota, and so I saw this one in there. There was one for a physical educator who wanted to be a liaison to the public school teachers that were needing to be trained in some physical education theory and activities and stuff. At the laboratory school at UNC, how are we doing? At the laboratory school at UNC, one of our basic responsibilities with the School of Education was to allow laboratory students to come into our classrooms and work with them in becoming familiar with different aspects of the curriculum. And so I had them in my classroom for 10 years, 9 or 10 years. And so I wasn't afraid of doing any kind of, educational work in that respect. But so I went to North Dakota, got that job, and then stayed there actually 3 years, and did go out into the schools and did workshops for elementary ed teachers who wanted more training and more ideas about things they could do in physical activity and fitness and stuff like that for their students. But then there was the superintendent's position was a political position, and he lost the election, and they started changing things in the department, and I said, this is not what I want to do. What he had me do, or they had me assigned to, and so I went to Hastings College in Hastings, Nebraska. They hired me as a physical education methods teacher in Department of Ed and physical education, and I became the assistant women's basketball coach and did that for 10 years.
Wow.
About 4 years into that, I applied for the registrar's position at the college, continued to teach a course in elementary physical education, and was the registrar then for 10 years, and ended up a 25-year career at Hastings College in Nebraska.
Wow.
Before retiring. But I think to sum up...
Well, how many years altogether were you in education?
10 more, 25, 35, basically 35 years in teaching. Actually contact with students either at the...
But I mean, your overall educational career, with everything combined, was 35 years?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I hadn't really ever thought about that to any extent, but it was good. I mean, it was where I wanted to be and where I liked being. And then I was ready to retire when I retired from that position. And actually, when I went to North Dakota, I should have backtracked there. That's where I met my current wife. She was in the Department of Ed where I was, and we just met and fell in love and ended up blending a family. We had 2 daughters and a son, and we lived in Hastings for, like I said, 25 years, and 2 of them graduated from Hastings, and my son went to KU and graduated from KU in architecture and engineering and art, and he is a ceramic artist. And the other 2, my youngest is a psychiatric social worker and works with families, and my oldest is a high school teacher of history and social studies. So Sandy and I love living in this part of the country. We did go to New Mexico for a few years when our youngest grandchild was born, and I was retired, so we went down there. Now we came up here, and now our family the two of the three grandchildren are here. So we moved to. Well, I actually, before I retired, I finally registered with the VA in Nebraska, and realized that I should have taken advantage of that long ago. But I got frustrated with them in the mid-'80s when they weren't really recognizing. I didn't know what it was. Recognizing the needs of veterans as I thought they should be. And but we came out here, and we came up here from New Mexico, and really liked the area. And I got, as I said, through Ken Curry and some other friends, Phyllis mentioned some other vets that I met through Pam Vets, which was probably it is the only organization that I ever got associated with. I looked at some of the other military type of organizations and didn't feel comfortable with them. But anyway, so I got here and I realized that I needed a resource. I didn't know how to take advantage of that as far as the VA was concerned, and to file my claims and all that. And I went to the DAV. I got a great Marine, I don't know what he was called, reception person, and he found out that I had combat experience, and he said, well, there's no doubt that you have PTSD, and through that I got my initial claims with the VA, and then did all the interviews for PTSD and assessments, and have been working through the Vet Center and the VA in northern Colorado here. So I feel very fortunate. I feel blessed to have a wonderful family. Our immediate family, a blended family, is just outstanding people, and we couldn't be more blessed.
Oh, wow. Well, you talked about, that plane ride, and then you just kind of bottle it all up for so many years, and you've been able to release that now. I mean, is there a distinction between all those years that it just was bottled up and you probably didn't talk about it and held back the fact you were a Vietnam vet, and now have you been able to release?
I think that's where the Vet Center in Fort Collins has great counselors, and we have been able to form this group of similar vets, of age group in Vietnam, that we have learned to talk to each other, and I think share a lot of feelings and issues, and realizing that we would probably never get over and solve the PTS problems, but we can learn to live with them. We can learn to deal with them in our day-to-day lives and families, and it's amazing how many of us have had 2 marriages because of the PTS syndrome in our early marriages, anger and issues and stuff like that. Hot button points, we call them, that just set us off and get mad at drivers driving down the road bad and stuff like that. But anyway, road rage, but I guess they call it. But I think that, yes, I think that we have learned to live with it and deal with it. And I keep going to this, we call them God Soldiers, on Monday nights twice a month at Grace Church in Berthoud. I keep going there, and one of our best topics that we discuss over and have several times is wanting to know at this stage of our life, other than what we personally want, what does the Lord have in mind for us at this stage? And what is the end game going to be like, and how does it affect us and everything? But it's just the veteranness military veteran in us keeps us joining with other vets to search our feelings and our issues and stuff like that. So I think I'm very fortunate to be right where I am.
Wow, wow. And I've heard so often too, and it sounds like during your working career that you put everything into work and you're so busy, juggling coaching jobs and such, and then so maybe it was easier to keep that stuff bottled up. And I've heard from so many that then they retired. Now they had more time to think. Did you see that more stuff coming out then, or?
Yeah, I think that's very well put, because I just kept myself so busy.
Yeah.
I did things I wanted to do, and I kept busy with the athletics and the teaching. And as many people know, teaching is not a 9 to 5 job. It's a 7 days a week job,
right.
And then coaching is even more so that way. It's in season, and so yes, you're right. I think you just were able to cover it up. And it'd jump out at you and bite you every now and then, but until you studied it, and I think that's where the Vet Center really helped me, is I learned what it was about it. There's a PhD from the university, CSU, that does seminars on what PTSD is and how it affects the brain and the core of the brain and everything. And you learn, me being interested, I learned what it is, and then I started learning how to personally deal with it as best I can. So
just nice to have a name.
Associated.
What I can't understand what I'm feeling now. You've got a name and reason and a diagnosis. It must have been a relief.
Right,
just
it
like
is
that.
a relief.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you had mentioned too. You had really thought about the war, and obviously being in it back then. Now that you've had 50 years to digest it, what are your thoughts on the Vietnam War now as you look back on it?
Well, I learned a lot more. I'm trying to think of his name. The documentary that Blake Burke?
Ken Burns?
Ken Burns did. I watched quite a few of those sessions. Actually, the Vet Center invited us up whenever they were being broadcast, and you could sit in with two or three other vets and a counselor and watch them. So we learned a lot. I took a good friend, a Marine vet, up there with me when they went into Way, and anyway, he was there. Anyhow, it was hard on him, really hard on him, with the actual video, but he was glad he did it. Went through it again and kind of felt through it again. But I learned about why and how we got there. And so my feelings about Vietnam now are a little bit, I didn't feel at any point in time when I was there that I knew what our goal was.
Yeah.
I knew what our intermediate or basic job was, but I didn't know what our goal was. What were we trying to, because we would go into a village and 10 days later we would have that same village to go into again because the VC had been there again. But that kind of thing just really blew my mind. And so I hadn't thought about it until I looked at all those documentaries, and I see how probably politicians got involved and things got messed up there and really affected the way we were attuned to fighting a war as far as World War II.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I did one other thing since I got back. I got interested in genealogy, but I went back and I organized all the military, direct lineage military people in my mom and dad's background, the history.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what I was representing in that lineage.
Wow. Wow.
From World War II through, well, before that, clear back to, I think the first ones I found were obviously war between the states. And we had Southern in my dad's and Northern in my mom's side.
Huh.
And I found out a lot about them, and we went to Arkansas and did a personal tour where my grandfather lived, and I didn't even know his involvement or in the community. And he was he was a second lieutenant in the First World War, and then he tried to enlist in the Second World War, and they wouldn't take him, so he became Kansas City, Kansas defense director and organized the militia, you know, and stuff like that, that I just was able to learn through genealogy. And we're down to my son did not have any male. My granddaughter might be in the military, who knows?
Right.
But right now we're down to my brother, who has a great-grandson. And so it's still on, Smiths are still being involved in the military, so.
Wow. Now, did you, when you got back or any time years later, did you and your dad ever sit down and talk about each other's experience and at all?
You know what's funny about that? I think this is the one thing that I've learned from other veterans, is that even World War II, and see, I didn't know my granddad well enough, but even in World War II, Dad had all his flight gear that he could keep and bring home and all that. He had it all in the attic and in everything, and we played with it as young boys, and then when I got old enough to, when I should have wanted to, we didn't.
Yeah.
And these documents that he wrote to me, I saved 2 of them that he typed up, mean a lot about that, because he's kind of given you some advice and experiences from his experience. But I didn't. Even more so than that, I had 2 uncles that were in the infantry in Europe. And I truly wish I had been able to corner them. One he was a command driver of a Jeep, and he became wounded. But the other one is exactly what happens to some of my Vietnam friends and people. I've got 2 good buddies that were good buddies then that have returned to alcohol or drugs, alcohol mostly. He was, and he really didn't ever get out of that, get over that. But my other uncle, I would have loved to pick his brain. I wondered what I could learn. Yeah. You just don't know.
Yeah.
I wish you could go back, but you can't.
Well, yeah. So, wow.
And so those are 2 of the things that I wish. My dad did one thing as a letter. I got great communication.
Yeah, well, I guess we didn't talk about that, communications back and forth while you were in country and how that worked.
I wrote a lot of letters. You can see my 3-inch binder, but that were saved for me, and that was great. It allowed me to coordinate my pictures with those in-country pictures with those letters. But he did something that only I think I don't know where he learned this, but my dad did. He sent me a letter with, 20 questions. That it was later in my tour of duty, so he knew what I was doing. He knew he was a news person, and so he followed that very closely. And this letter is just questions about, well, what happens here, or what do you do here? What is an ARVN? What does the ARVN do in Vietnam? How are you associated with them? Well, we had a Kit Carson Scout, but that was the only ARVN that we had in our company. I didn't mention him. I'll mention him when we do the photos, because he's in one of them. But anyway, that's the wish that I had, that we could go back and talk to him. My dad, he never talked about it really.
Yeah. That generation really didn't, as you did until you got older. But yeah. Did were you under like with your dad during World War II? They were all restricted on what they could write and such. Did you have any sort of those restrictions where you were censored at all with letters?
I wasn't. I don't remember ever hearing someone say that. I do. I should say that. When I was in one of the training units, it was probably NCO, that they said you cannot or should not. I think more than cannot. I don't think they opened letters, most of them, but they said you should not write about tactical issues or where you are in a tactical fashion. You know, talk about it in general terms, and that's why the letters don't really say a lot other than I'm well and good, and I have this duty now. I'm on the bridges again, and I'm, and I didn't even tell them what we did on the bridges, but I made a mistake one time and sent a picture of me with my Ho Chi Minh sandals on, sitting on some ammo boxes, and in the background was a blown out tower that had been satchel charged, and my mom didn't like that one much. It was pretty scary for her, but I didn't even think of it because it wasn't why I was there on that bridge. It had been blown up before.
Did you tell them about your wound, or was that after you got home?
No, I informed them that I had been wounded and that I was in a field medical hospital, and they were lancing my wound, and everything was good, and I was planning to go back to my unit. So that was all in the letter that I did send, and I have those letters too. But I felt that I could do. They should know.
Yeah.
If I lost a leg, then they'd know why.
Yeah, right. And your brother never had to go over?
My brother he joined the Air Force and went through basic, and he got good duty. He had the Red Cross helping him with the Vietnam situation. They kept him in good stead. Joe was fortunate; he was at the Pentagon for part of his duty, and in Omaha for part of his duty, and that was close to home even. So I felt good. My decision was right.
Yeah. Wow. And you said through the years you've gone to reunions and have kept in touch with some of the guys. And
well, I have
is that
two
ongoing, or
yeah, I have two that I kept most in closely with. One was just a private, and he's just a guy I liked. Anyway, Dennis Wolf, and then the other was Terry Cogswell, which was another buck sergeant that went over similar to mine, and I've kept in contact with him regularly, annually at least. I don't know, I wanted my wife to be able to go to one of these reunions and meet him, and they, again, it's gotten on so far that not very many go, and it's we go to Branson during Veterans Day in November, and that's where they have the reunion, and Branson just lays out the red carpet for veterans. It is amazing, and it's really a good experience.
Good.
But I have to say, probably I'd say the most I was trying to think of the word. The most unique, I wrote it down somewhere. Anyway, but the greatest experience I've had, and the best feeling I've had about my Vietnam experience, was when I got to go on the honor flight from northern Colorado. Mm-hmm. That's an amazing experience for somebody like me.
Sure.
I actually personally felt like I did something right by going to Vietnam.
Wow.
Serving my country.
So
up until then?
Yeah, so that took you till 2013 to realize that.
That's exactly right. 40 to 50 years, most of us, to realize that we actually did it for a good cause. Not that we don't love our country.
Yeah, right.
I don't think that's the case at all. I'm a very patriotic person. And Memorial Days and days like that are real important. And Independence Day have always been celebrated. I have, with reverence. And so, but it did take that long for me to realize, you know.
Well, as we start to wind down this interview, I know I haven't asked a lot of questions. I've just pretty much sat back and let you talk. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about? Any other stories that have kind of floated to the top as we've been sitting here? So I know, like I said, we I'm sure only got the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully, what else can we add to this that we can get well-rounded and tell the story as best we can? Is there anything that you'd like to talk about? The stories, or trying to think other things that I've got a gazillion questions. I guess I should just fire away, but
Well, yeah, I'm better off if you do, because I didn't think I'd have very much to talk about, and I feel like I have, and it's been a real pleasure to do that. But as far as my overall experience, I really feel like I was fortunate to come home from a combat situation, and I've been fortunate since then to be living with people and in a society that actually respects me, I think, for what I did. The one thing people are really good about now in the last 10 years or more is thanking us for our service. And the one thing that the veteran of Vietnam says to another veteran is welcome home.
Right, yeah.
And I think that's meaningful. Because we put it aside for 40 years.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think the one thing we do as veterans, and being organized in some way as a veteran with other guys of our age, we really look at taking care of our buddies. Still, we look at taking care of our buddies. If within our group a veteran needs our help, we try to assist them in any way we can.
Well, I can see that in you. I think it was seared into you in Vietnam. Throughout your whole as we sat here today, it seemed like the concentration was on your guys. So that just seemed to have followed you, and I'm sure that you were that way in your coaching and teaching, and I'm sure it's just it just has been followed you through your life. Yeah. Wow. Well, the last question I always like to ask with these interviews is, as you look back on your life, or in particular your time in the service and over in Vietnam, how did that affect you, change you, play a role in your life, or as you look back, was it just a chapter in your life? How would you answer that, do you think?
Well, at the time, I think it was a chapter in my life, but I look back on the experiences I had, and I feel like it did change me. I think I became very pointed in my goals of what I wanted to do and accomplish, and I think more than anything, it probably helped me to decide and be the person I am and deal with other people, in dealing with other people. I think because you get those deep feelings about those people in a combat area. I did anyway, and you want to just treat people well, because your experience in combat is not good.
Yeah.
And you don't, you like to see people treated better. And it's not the Army's fault, it's not the military's fault, it's the environment that you're in that makes you feel that way. And so you like to see people treated well.
Yeah, right. Wow.
Respect and gratitude and over time. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Jim, we'll move on here to pictures in a second, but I want to thank you for sitting down to tell your story today, but more importantly, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Well, I appreciate that. This is a photo of my graduation from NCO school, Fort Benning, Georgia, and in 1968. This is a photo of my first duty station at Fort Ord, California, in a infantry AIT unit in 1968.
Now, for those that don't know, AIT stands for?
Advanced Infantry Training Unit, and OJT, or on-the-job training, as they called it in my assignment, working with infantry recruits.
And where are you in the picture?
I'm on the left of the front row.
Right there. Okay.
This is a photo of me standing with George Goebel. He flew in and visited our fire base where we were stationed at the time, and I thought it appropriate to have a picture with him, one of the few celebrities I saw while I was in Vietnam in 1969.
Was this part of like a USO show, or?
Yeah, it was a tour, part of a tour, and he just came out to a fire base.
Was he as funny as in person as he was on TV?
He's hilarious, yes, he is. This is a patrol, picture of me on patrol. We were in a nighttime base camp or perimeter, and we had been in the field for 14 days at this point, and I did have a leg wound, and shortly thereafter was shipped off to a field hospital at a different location than where we were at that time.
Now, have you, has that caused you any problems through the years, or did it fully heal, or?
I haven't ever noticed any. I do have scar tissue, works itself out of that location in my leg, but it doesn't cause me any issues with movement or anything like that. So
good.
This is a photo of Ernie Garcia. He was my right-hand man. He was my RTO, radio telephone operator, who walked and humped right along beside me throughout the time that I was a staff sergeant and platoon sergeant in Vietnam.
And you said you tracked him down through the years, or is this when you haven't been?
No, here's what I do know where he is, but I have never gotten any personal contact with him. He's in Southern California. This is a photo. We were on a pretty secure fire base, and I had been carrying in my rucksack this Kansas flag, and any time that we were in a position where we could fly it, I would try to fly it. But this I call my John Wayne or Audie Murphy photo, because I loaded up with all the ammo, bandoliers and ammo, and that's when I had a thorn stuck in my finger, and they had to bandage it, and that even makes it more authentic, I guess. I don't look wounded or something. This is a photo of my platoon. I'm the second from the right in the back row. We had just come out of the field for a stand down for Thanksgiving in 1969. And it's a pretty ragtag looking group, but that's the way we were quite a bit of the time. This is a photo of me, excuse me. We were on getting ready for a CA, waiting for the choppers to come pick us up. And I was just taking a picture of how I went into the field and carrying my rucksack and with what weaponry we had at that time. Later on, I showed this to someone, and they thought I had a prisoner, and I had my weapon pointed at a Vietnam or Viet Cong, and it's not. It's actually our company, Kit Carson Scout Lawn, and he just happened to be there, and the way the photo was taken, it looks like I'm got him under coverage, but it was just a picture of me and how I went into the field. This is a photo of me and Lieutenant Davis. He was my favorite platoon leader. Of the 3 or 4 that I had, he was out of Spokane, Washington. He was a reservist, and he was ordered to Vietnam to be a small unit leader in late 1969 too. This is a photo of me on the right and Dennis Wolf on the left. He is one of the buddies that I maintained contact with when I got back from Vietnam. He was from northern Iowa, and he was a well-educated person, and he had a real and interesting life, and he owned a farm and expanded that farm into a very productive environment up there. But I only had a few close people, and I don't even have a photo of Terry Cogswell, who I thought a great deal of too. But Dennis I do, and I've seen him twice. I saw him right after I returned in Iowa, and near Iowa City, and then I saw him at a reunion here in 2018. This is a shadow box that I made a few years back. I have all the documentation for these awards. I don't know the exact time and place when they were awarded, other than when I processed out. I won the Bronze Star. I think it was awarded to me because I was an E6 in combat and finished that tour of duty. I got the Purple Heart in the upper right hand for my leg wound. I received in the upper left hand corner the Air Medal because of the 1st Battalion, or the 8th Battalion being an air transport battalion. Air Cav, as it was called in Vietnam. And the other 2 were the National Defense Medals and the Vietnam Campaign Medal. So that's what I made a shadow box out of, and I think it's the way I like it, simple and distinctive, but they were awarded in a time when I didn't feel, or still don't feel, I was deserving of any awards.
Oh, wow. Wow.
This is a photo of me in 1980 when I was applying for jobs in North Dakota before my tenure up there in the State Department of Education. I'm going to see it stand. This is a photo of our immediate family. It's a blended family, a wonderful family. This is when I was 70 years old. And now I'm 78, and I haven't had another good family photo taken, and it needs to be done. But so this is all the kids and the grandkids in one place.
Oh, very nice.